Bears football, Maggle. That is right. We're going to the Windy City to play some Bears football as we take a look at the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears, who went 6-11, played a season-long's worth of Bears football, all 2021 long. And I don't know if I should feel sorry for Bears fans for this massively depressing season, but when you look at their 2021, it was just that, a depressing disappointment. Going into this season for the Chicago Bears, you have to look back at their season prior, 2020. Aside from the pandemic stuff, it pretty much saw them endure pretty much the worst case scenario for both Bears fans and their organization. The team went 8-8 again. This time they got a playoff appearance out of it, and I'll explain why in just a bit. But they were winning against the worst of the worst. They made a late stretch run pretty much against the worst of the worst, against the likes of the Texans, the Vikings, the Lions. Yeah, they eked out some victories against some very terrible teams. And when it came to nut busting time for Mitch Trubisky and Nick Fails, Fails, when it came to nut busting time in Week 17 against their daddy now owner, Aaron Rodgers, and the Green Bay Packers to get that playoff spot that they so desperately want, they got their asses kicked again. And yet they still managed to clinch that fluky playoff spot. Keep in mind, this is the first year in 2020 that they instituted that 7th playoff spot for whatever reason. So they clinched that fluky playoff spot thanks to the Cardinals' first of what would be many second half season chokes. So to no surprise, the Bears the following week would get their asses beat and embarrassed so bad, just barely though, by Drew Brees and the New Orleans Saints in the wild card. And they would get embarrassed so badly that kids, yes, the kids, ended up getting scarred for life. They got scarred for life by the inaugural MVP, Mitch Trubisky, for his horrid performance, as well as Cordell Patterson's F-bomb on Nickelodeon. Still, the Bears ended the season with a playoff appearance. To the McCaskey family's eyes, it was great, pal. It's like, oh, that's enough to keep the bald-ass Matt Nagy and punk-ass Ryan Pace around for at least one more year. But the MVP? Nope. He's gone. We're going to ship him out of here. We're going to kick his ass out the door. So the MVP, the inaugural MVP, took his talents to Western New York to be Josh Allen's backup in Buffalo. But Matt Nagy, Ryan Pace, those mediocre fucks, they're still here. They were still there for one more season. Don't know how, don't know why. But as the Schleck Daddy likes to say, it's the mediocrity of the McCaskey way. So anyway, the Bears didn't really do much in free agency. They did do some really odd things, I guess. They franchise tagged receiver Allen Robinson, who hadn't really done shit since 2018 when he signed in free agency back then. And then they signed, yes, the Red Raffle, Andy Dalton, at the start of free agency. And that's pretty telling of how the Bears were approaching their 2021. They were just passing it along as, okay, okay. But you think that Andy Dalton and Nick Foles, were going to lead the charge for the Chicago Bears in 2021. But no, instead, the Bears actually made a competent move during the 2021 draft. They traded up a couple spots to number 11 with the New York Giants to get the quarterback of the future, at least supposedly so, in Ohio State quarterback Justin Fields. What I liked about Justin Fields was he's a very good deep ball passer, as he's shown throughout the season when the games that he started. The problem was sometimes that he's just too slow to read defenses. Anyway, so they get their potential future starting quarterback and potential franchise-changing quarterback, at least for now, in Justin Fields. But the thing was, they didn't really do anything to get him some help, especially up front on the offensive line. So Ryan Pace got one part right, but then he didn't get the other parts correct. So All these issues would eventually rear its ugly head eventually throughout the season. And I know initially it didn't look that way. It didn't really look that way when the Bears started 3-2. Actually, it did look that way even with the 3-2 start, because problems were persistent all around. You had an offensive line that had Jason Peters and Cody Whitehair completely struggle against the likes of Aaron Donald, Myles Garrett, and Max Crosby. Like, who could forget Myles Garrett? I think it was like 5 or 8 sack performance alone on Justin Fields in that game in Cleveland. Like, my God, that just speaks to the terribleness of the offensive line built by Ryan Pace. And then in the games that he started, even well beyond the 3-2 start to the season, Andy Dalton was just a $10 million disaster. Yes, they were paying $10 million for just 1 year of Andy Dalton, because Andy Dalton was either just, playing it safe, checking it down, well short of first down yardage, or he was when he tried to go for the deep ball, because he's the red rifle, he was throwing it well inaccurate, and it often led to turnovers. And eventually it became a lot of them. And the defense, the defensive line with Robert Quinn and Khalil Mack, I mean, pretty solid, still pretty solid, but the rest of the defense was pretty bad. It was pretty bad. They gave up too many big plays. They couldn't tackle anyone. The defense was not good at all. Aside from the defensive line, I guess. But, they were 3-2 by the quarter point of the season, and you already had delusional Bears fans thinking that, they could go on a playoff run because you had Justin Fields already in the starting role, when in reality, he had the starting role because Andy Dalton got injured. But still, you had those Bears fans, those diehard Bears fans that believe that they're true Bears fans, and not the ones that think, like, realistically, that don't buy into the mediocrity. So they were already thinking playoffs. But then the rest of the season came. Bears go 3-9. That stretch of the Aaron Rodgers claiming ownership of the Bears and Tom Brady opening up a can of whoop ass on the Bears in Tampa. It began a can of worms for what was to come for the Chicago Bears in 2021. The rest of the season saw the Bears go 3-9, primarily for the same reasons I just mentioned, as well as a couple of new ones, but mostly for the ones I just said. Like I said, Justin Fields, he seems like he's going to be a good quarterback, but he has to work on a couple of things. I like how he throws how he throws his passes, how he throws the ball. He throws a good deep ball. Like, he's a good range quarter. He's a good throwing range. The problem is he just reads defenses a little too slow, and I know it doesn't help the fact that he has a broken offensive line, but he has to be able to realize to get out of the pocket and get that ball out to his receivers. And eventually, all those sacks, all those hits that he took, eventually took a toll on him. He missed a couple of games due to rib injuries, and he also had a separate ankle injury. And then he eventually missed the last game of the season against the Vikings with a positive COVID test. So, yeah, I mean, not a spectacular, not even a good year for Justin Fields, but in a few games, in a few games that he played, that he showed a little bit of flashes of how good he can be. The rest of the offense, yeah, not so great. The receiving core was pretty bad, especially Allen Robinson when he was in a contract year, and when he had the franchise tag on him, trying to prove that, maybe I deserve a long-term contract, even if it's like not a big amount of money. I at least deserve a long-term contract. But man, he really disappointed. He couldn't get open. He was dropping passes. He just really disappointed. Darnell Mooney, though, on the other hand, was actually a reliable go-to option for Justin Fields. And last but not least, Matt Nagy, bad head coach this year. Called a lot of conservative plays for the entirety of the year, and he would call some wrong plays too in critical situations. He would call some running plays on fourth down, and the defense was ready for it. He would also call some check down plays for either Justin Fields or Andy Dalton, or even Nick Foles at one point. And just the defenses were ready for just about everything Matt Nagy was throwing their way. Is it Matt Nagy was running a very predictable offense. So overall, it was a terrible year for Chicago Bears. And no matter what their 6-11 record says, it's just a testament of how this team's run offense and their coaching staff. They had no one to blame but themselves. They can't blame Justin Fields. They can't blame Khalil Mack. They can't blame Robert Quinn. They built this mess. They put this mess together. They decided to do the typical Bears football political bullcrap, all the cheap bullshit, and not get quality talent to build around Justin Fields to at least build a competent team. I mean, this mediocrity, the lack of help, especially on the offensive line, very evident in losses to the Rams, the 2 Packers losses, especially the Bucks, and even the Minnesota Vikings. When, especially in that Monday night primetime game, where the Bears were and the Vikings were playing Bears football all night long, my God, very evident that these teams were sucking ass all night. So, at least, going into next season, at least have a little bit of hope with Justin Fields, the running attack of David Montgomery and Khalil Herbert, Robert Quinn, their linebacker. I mean, they had decent seasons, but man, they're going to need more than that if they want to at least gain a little bit of relevance in 2022. So the McCaskies finally got smart and fired Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace. They got shown the door. Matt Nagy is back in Kansas City. Ryan Pace in Atlanta. Eventually, and they replaced them with another Matt and Ryan, Matt Eberflus and Ryan Poles. Ryan Poles, supposedly a key front office piece in Kansas City, previously served as a college scout and director of player personnel, and I kind of like his approach already. He said in I think it was in the scouting combine interview that he wants to address the offensive line right away, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So I kind of like that already about Poles. Meanwhile, with Eberflus, I'm not really sure what to expect with him. I mean, he's a defensive-minded coach, first ever head coaching job. I do know though that whatever he did in Indianapolis, it was okay for most of the season, but then you had that choke job in Jacksonville to end 2021. So going into the offseason, you hired these two. You have these 2 new hires in the front office and in the coaching staff with Eberflus and Poles. For as incompetent as the Bears organization is, and as much as they like to play Bears football all season long, all year long, yearly, they have to build around Justin Fields in the offseason. They have to assure they keep Justin Fields for years on end. Because if they don't, well, you're going to get fucked in the ass real hard. So going to the offseason, you have about $27 million in cap space. I mean, it doesn't seem like much on the surface, but you could spend at least a little bit to get at least a key piece. Maybe you can overspend a little on the offensive line because that's a key need. So some of your key free agents include interior defensive line Akeem Hicks, left tackle Jason Peters, right guard James Daniels, and wide receiver Allen Robinson. I know there's a long, exhaustive list of free agents, but these are, in my opinion, the key free agents that the Bears have on my radar. So the Bears don't have a first-round pick because they traded it to the New York Giants in that Justin Fields trade. So their first pick in this draft is going to be 39th. So some things to address in the offseason, be it the free agency and the draft, is, well, the top priority must be the offensive line. So Ryan Poles at least acknowledges that, so that's good. So now he has to execute on that. So he has to rebuild the offensive line to ensure that Justin Fields not only has a long and healthy career in the NFL, but, so the offense can actually function in 2022. Justin Fields needs to have time to throw the ball. Justin Fields can get some plays into Darnell Mooney or whoever's going to be the wide receiver wide receiver 2 or the wide receiver in Chicago next season. It also opened so that offensive line can open up some running lanes for David Montgomery and Khalil Herbert. Either way, that offensive line needs to be a priority in a couple weeks when the new league year starts. The secondary, the corners were burnt to a crisp all season long. But fortunately for the Bears, even with the little money to spend, the market is looking pretty good for them to get one. It doesn't have to, like, I know it's going to be a little tough to convince someone to, like, a big name to come over here in Chicago, but make it it can be a modest one or at least a quality one. Either way, they need to at least get a corner that can keep up with opposing receivers and create preventive plays. Last but not least, they have to get more receivers to help out Justin Fields and Darnell Mooney, because Mooney is the only one from last year that had at least a productive season. So half of the Bears free agents right now, including Allen Robinson, are free agents. So they're at least all the receivers that are free agents are likely heading towards new homes, barring some willing to take a discount or just wanted to take a short-term deal. Either way, Poles has to find a top receiver or a more reliable receiver than Allen Robinson, and he also has to find a tight end too. I'd say he has to find a tight end as well. And then once you find those two, you add on in the draft, so you can have depth to just in case of injuries, as well as to prevent defenses from singling out Mooney in 2022. So overall, the Bears face a lot of uncertainty in 2022 with the new Matt and Ryan regime, even if it's still the McCaskey show, that clown show in Chicago. But Justin Fields, he showed a couple of flashes in his rookie year, despite some bad coaching and a very poor supporting cast, especially on the offensive line. What the Bears have to do in a couple of weeks of free agency and the next month in the draft, they have to do what they can to not ruin a potential game-changing quarterback, at least in Chicago, by getting him some damn help, please. Otherwise, it's just going to be a rehash of years past with 2017, 2018, 2019, and last season. It's just going to be a bunch of Bears football all year long.